My name is Refugio, and this is Camino Stories. Hello, and welcome to Camino Stories. I'm recording this podcast in the fall. Things are getting darker sooner. It's been quite a few intense months since I last recorded one of these. Been thinking a lot about darkness and light and that transition, and also about thought distortions, especially since I've been having some intense few months with one of my brothers that had schizophrenia. He had a recaída, and we're still working through that. I'm hopeful that things will get better, but it's been improving, but it's still we're working through it. I could say more about that, but it's been very tolling, and I think this also tracks with the reflection of the journey in my life, how it's filled with dark and shadows, but also light, like all of us. I've been seeing a lot of that with other loved ones, and just things that everybody's struggling with scary places, but also experiencing some beautiful, amazing, and transformational moments, feeling it in your body, deep within. Everything that makes up who you are is kind of called to be and to face the moments, the moment that we face, and personally, the moment that I need to face, I've been facing for the past few months. Many moments that have been challenging, but so it's interesting how this episode, today's episode, it tracks that as well, and it connects to the road that I've been on. I have a connection with my next guest, who is Joseph Delgado, author of the poetry book Broken Mesas. I have this connection through my first guest, Andrade, who was my first guest that I interviewed on the podcast. And we both have been admirers of Joseph, and as also practitioners of writing poetry here and there. I think we both look up to him, to Joseph, and then just this connection that we've been having for several years now. So I was super excited to talk to Joseph, and I hope that it didn't distract too much just how excited I was. Because his poetry means so much to me, and I said that at the end. I was so grateful that we were able to talk about such deep and meaningful topics like mental health and exploring things of shadows and light, and also it was so gracious of him for him to share his process when he crafts his poetry. And I just identify with Joseph so much, with his talents and gifts. They mean a lot to me. Like I said, as another gay Latino Chicano man from this region in the Southwest, I think he's the embodiment of so many things that I identify with, like being, that I aspire to be, with this rawness and authenticity, but with the powerful purpose of healing and being a visionary leader and just breaking barriers and tapping into something deeply spiritual that connects to the soul place and reflects your unique personality, unique talents, and culture and legacy from the ancestors and the land, our connection to the land where we're from and where I'm from, and how that has shaped me as a person. So it was super moving to get to see just how much I have in common with them, and for the most part, I feel like I was successful in just having a conversation with him and just connect on that level. And anyways, I hope that you take a listen, and hope that it inspires you and inspires the things that in your journey that you've been contemplating. Maybe it sparks some ideas. drop a comment on my YouTube page when I upload this. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what thoughts it inspires in you, or questions that you have and reactions that you have. But I am super excited and to have this out in the internet and live as a testament to um, that testimony that we are here, and it's a beautiful thing. So here it is.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hey, Joseph.
How's it
Nice.
going today?
It's going well. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
How's your afternoon going so far?
It's going pretty good. Actually started my day. So I work graveyard. So a couple hours ago, finally got up and
Oh,
having my
really?
morning coffee. Yeah, my daily coffee and my wake and bake and whatnot.
Oh, nice. Wow. So you're more used to going to sleep late. Well, I suppose.
Yeah,
And you're
usually
up.
about 7 a.m., then wake up around noon or one-ish. You know. So how's your day going?
It's going well. Sundays are usually the days when I go to a hike with my family, and um, I try to, yeah, just run errands and do the things that I didn't get to do during the week because of work.
Oh, awesome.
Um, but yeah, and is this like your usual Sunday routine that you have?
Yeah, pretty much. It's kind of like more of a lazy day,
Mm.
get up. Sometimes I'll go do some thrift store shopping, make it to the Goodwills. I always gravitate towards the books and cameras,
Mm.
try to keep it easy, maybe a little bit of yard work, light yard work, rake here and there.
Hmm.
Just be kind of lazy and then start the rest of my days off before I have to go right back to the hustle.
Nice. And you said you like coffee. Is there like because I'm a coffee drinker, so not that like I'm particular about my coffee, but I like, do you like café de olla, or like, is there anything just from the gas station?
Oh, yeah, I'm a total gas station coffee slut, I love gas station coffee. I'm not particular about my coffee,
Mm.
Folgers even, I mean, most of the people that I know, they're not really coffee aficionados. So, it's more like tabletop coffee, which is just perfectly fine,
Yeah.
it gets things going. But I do
Yeah.
love coffee, I'm more of an espresso drinker,
Hmm.
but I kind of live in a rural area. So the availability, you got to drive quite a bit just to enjoy, a good latte or something.
Yeah, I wanna ask you about that. But yeah, I when you were saying that, it just, yeah, reminded me, because I used to work at Starbucks at one point, many, many years ago. And my friend and I, Angela, we used to joke, and because we enjoy the coffee from the gas stations a lot. So it'd be like, don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
Our favorite coffee is like, from the Circle K or whatever.
Oh, I know, like Dunkin' Donuts coffee, it's like, hey, it's pretty
Mm,
good.
yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not picky about coffee. I love it. I love every
Mhm.
taste of it. Even the gourmet coffees are good, but
Mhm.
yeah, I used to work at a Starbucks many, many moons ago as well.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, during my college years, yeah, I worked briefly at Starbucks. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's where I got my fill.
for some reason I was like, I feel like Joseph worked at Starbucks at some point. I don't know why. Yeah. But well, thanks for making time for this
Oh,
conversation.
well, thank you
And
too.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And where to begin? There's so many things that I wanna talk about. But I'll try to, maybe we can, hopefully, we can, this is the beginning of a conversation, or more in touch.
Yeah, right on.
And yeah, and really, just to kind of open up with setting the context of, please feel free to share any poetry as we move through the conversation.
Okay.
If something like feels like it's better answered by reading something than like actual linear logic. Please, by any means. Yeah, just to illustrate something that you want to highlight, as we explore some of these themes. I was I, I was thinking about this conversation this week, and I was looking up, if you've given like conversations like this, or we had conversations like this in the past, and I found one podcast. I don't know if you've done others, but there's one out there. It From Minor Literature Radio.
Oh, yes.
Okay, yeah, and that one, there was a few, it was brief, so it was nice, and also you said some really interesting things in there that reminded me of how I open these podcasts, and I always open with this question of, if you had a hero, or if you could be a hero, like who would that be and why? And the reason why I ask is because, like, in the Camino podcast stories, I one of the things that I like to explore is this hero's journey and like archetypes, and also, but not explore in the sense of like it's all like, I don't know, just there's an end goal and everything resolves and people live happily ever after, but more in the sense of, um, the lights and shadows we that make up who we are, and throughout our lives, and that's it's not like a end destination, but it's all of our the journeys and the pathways that we travel, in our experiences. And so, um I wanted, there were three authors that you mentioned in that podcast, but the reason I mentioned the authors is that I wasn't sure if you were referring to like they're like your heroes, or like the people that you like to be. But anyways, just to start with that, like the basic question that I always ask is, who's your hero? If you could be a hero, it could be a fictional character, it could be a comic book character, it could be somebody in real life. Who would that be and why?
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out because I she comes to mind every time, and it's the person that whose work I think like struck to my heart. And an old description of this poet before I name her, a critic had once said her poetry is like grabbing you by the throat and pushing you up against the wall, kissing you deeply, and then slapping you across the face. And it was this intensity of her work, and that's going to be Ai Ogawa, one of the first poets I encountered as a young little hoto, on the shelves of the library. And it was really interesting finding her books like Sin and Cruelty and these intense poems that captured like this darkness, and her willingness to utilize language and bring to life these scenarios that at first are cringe. There's some devastating moments in here. There's violence, there's sexual violence, there is this realization of brokenness, and she's not afraid to look at it and stare at it and then relate it to you. And I thought it was a huge break in the canon tradition of these poems that, yeah, they pretty much touched on darkness, but it was trying to look away from that darkness, trying to find more of a hope. And Ai was no, because even in this darkness, look at it, there could be moments of beauty. And some of her poems were very shocking that way. Be scenes of sexual violence, but the focus is an orchid in the corner. And so that's why I always admired her work, her intensity. And I think that's one of the driving forces. So she is very much part of a hero for me. And her willingness to go there. And I think that put her in conflict with the rest of the poetry world and with people's sensibilities. And I just admire it. And I felt after I encountered her, I saw how much I code switch and censor myself, how much I'm not willing to look at the cringe, to look at the truth of the darkness. And if I'm not willing to look at it, then I'm not willing to heal. I'm not willing to actually face even the most embarrassing things that I have to work through, and so that's why that's a motivation in my poetry, is that digging deep, it's like punching raw right through like the veneer, so not this like poetic veneer, but going more into this real humanity that's messy and complex, and it ain't so black and white. We try to be good, but sometimes even in the good there is a ferocity.
Hmm. Well, yeah, wow. So that was the author that caught the most of my attention. You mentioned a couple others, but just not that they're less significant, because it sounded like they were both this triage of, pillars that you highlighted.
Oh, absolutely. Joy Harjo and Deborah Magpie Early, these three ladies are the first serious pieces of literature I encountered when I was a young man
Mm,
that shook my world. It just shook it all. I mean, we were presented with all these great poets and writers, and most of them dead and white. And amazing poetry. I'm not going to denounce their poetry. I mean, beautiful images, but there was something missing for me. There was something that wasn't me there. And I think when I encountered these three great writers, it just it threw me through a plate glass window, and it opened up a whole new world for me. And all three of them, the intensity of their words and how they utilize language, and the repetition and the descriptions, it's just astounding.
yeah.
So they are foundational poets for me. So if anybody were asked, what should be on your bookshelf, it would be those three writers there.
Yeah, I love the way that you describe all three, and it just it caught my ear when you talked about using that vivid language, and then just especially with Ai Ogawa, it reminded me. So you did mention in that interview that uh what grabbed you was the very dark subject matters, and it reminded me of my own experience. When I got into poetry in high school, and it was during a period of my life when things were uh, very chaotic, and you might have heard in my other past episodes. I've talked about having two brothers that are schizophrenic. They have schizophrenia, and they've been diagnosed they were diagnosed in my high school years, and um, I it was really hard for me to wrap my head around. All I wanted to do is escape. I didn't want to be in my house, so I would try to just spend as much time outside as I could, even though I didn't really have a lot of friends and back then, and I just needed to go somewhere, right? And so I remember going to a bookstore and just like browsing around and just to kill time. And I saw that a new book had come out regarding poetry by Jim Carroll. And it was around the time when Leonardo DiCaprio had released that movie that he made portraying him. And I was browsing through the book, and it just grabbed me, like how raw and uh, just a lot of it's very I don't even know how to describe it, the experiences from drug addictions and being out in the street, prostituting yourself, and all these really dark themes, but there was this underpinning subtext there of survival, and even with all going through all of this, right? And I remember like sneaking into the movie theater to try to watch it, and I think it was like I sneaked in right when there's a scene where Jim Carroll like explains basically jerking off like under the stars, and just describing that whole within that backdrop of like what his life is like. And basically I just remember relating to like life being like living in like being in living hell, and that's how I felt when I encountered um that that this book and this movie, and then I started to explore Jim Carroll. And but it just reminded me so much, like when you describe this describe Ai Ogawa, it reminded me of that experience. And And yeah, it's just as I was wondering, like when you discovered these authors, and in particular this one, like was there like a what was the backdrop in your life at the time, if whatever you mind sharing?
Well, I think when I encountered these authors, I was pretty young. I was about like maybe 12 or 13, and I was an angry kid. I was an angry kid because I couldn't be myself. And I remember that palpably. I knew I was queer early in my life. And it was all about code switching, this machoism, and growing up. And it was just like a dark secret in a way, where you were made to feel shame. And I think I dealt with it very negatively, where I lashed out. I was like that, angry teenager, locked myself in my room. Um, Dysfunctional kind of household. It was a weird kind of household. It wasn't abusive. It was emotional distancing. The family, like I can't even recall us eating dinner together. I don't even think that existed. I think family meals were limited to Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that was with the entire extended family. So that family dynamic where we gather around the table and we eat or we share, express love, even it really didn't exist. Um, from my perspective, though, there wasn't really. My parents didn't seem to be tuned into my life. There was, but it was kind of freeing because they also didn't have expectations. Um, but at the time that I encountered these authors, I call it my like awakening, and it happened like in one weekend, and it was inspired by I had kind of like we had a more well-to-do aunt, and she was a reader, collected magazines, and she would occasionally every month send down this garbage bag full of old paperbacks and Vanity Fair magazines. And how I came across these authors was reading, I believe it was either Vanity Fair or Vogue. There was a tiny little article on the bottom by Sherman Alexie. And at the time, he was an emerging author. He had just published his first poetry collection, and he had yet to publish what his great works that we would know today that would turn into Smoke Signals and whatnot. But he had written about his influence being Joy Harjo, and how amazing he found it as a indigenous writer, that not only you could be a great indigenous poet, but you could also be a lesbian indigenous poet. And it was like shocking to read that, in this environment, this place where I grew up, where the mention of anything queer was just a taboo, so, or to find anything mentioning queerness in any way was extremely taboo. And that led me into discovering these authors, and to find out the whole time they were sitting on the bookshelves of a middle school, and to encounter these works, and the fact that the Albuquerque public school system had no idea what they had placed in a middle school, was utterly amazing. And it became like a secret at first, to hold these collections, to read, i.e., Sin and Cruelty and The Killing Floor. You kind of like wanted to keep it hidden. You don't want people to know that you were reading about this. And then Joy Harjo, she had some horses, the themes in there were shocking, where I wouldn't know who to speak to about them, And in this course of this couple of weeks, I remember watching PBS, and it's the first time I seen anything queer. I was up late, and at midnight, suddenly there was this new show that appeared on PBS called, I forget what it was called, but it was a queer-centered show about In the Life. And it was hosted by a lesbian woman who was the host, and they would go into segments about, HIV, and talk about queer life around the country. And of course, this is back in the early 90s, where we're still pretty much most of the country's in the closet, or in denial, and we're still emerging from the terrible deepness of the AIDS crisis of the 80s at the time, and just fear. And I think these women, they came to me, I think they saved me in a way. Finding their poetry saved me from anger. And it showed me that there was a valid way to express maybe that anger without just being angry to people and mistreating people and being a terrible person. I was very angry and lashed out at my family, lashed out at friends. But I think they help open a door to getting over that, of being able to say, okay, you know what? I recognize I am queer and there's nothing wrong with that. Even though I spent the last 12 years thinking there was something wrong with that,
Mm,
so I'm like grateful to them for opening that door, in the poetic sense.
mm, yeah. Yeah, I hear you for sure. When you were talking, it reminded me of just when when as a gay, as a queer person, sometimes, like I feel, um like growing up, like having two faces, like there's people talk about like splitting, of
Yeah.
just, and then there's this whole theme around like a whole double life, and like again keeping things in the shadows, and and then when you try to like be a whole person, it's because you grew up with so much of that, it's difficult, like it's like I have to like make efforts to like integrate or like bring things together, like it doesn't come easily. um I sometimes I have like a hint of jealousy of like the new generation. I'm grateful like the newer generations that have less of this, but also a little bit a hint of jealousy because I'm like, man, like I wished growing up, it was just, it would be easier, but the grass is always greener on the other side. But
Yeah.
but yeah, it reminds me of that.
I feel the same way. Like, I think it's beautiful that the current generations, like they can express themselves. You see Instagram, and you see they're just body positive, they're beautiful, they're queer, and they're open about it. And you do get a sense of jealousy that I would have never been able to
Mm,
survive the torment, perhaps, of the audio, of family judgment, just and people speaking. You would have been totally ostracized in my time, to the fringes, and then I think my queerness came out because some people, I think, picked up on it and used it as a way to bully and intimidate. And you found yourself living that double face mask where, oh, I'm not a faggot. Fuck you, bullshit. And then you basically become that kind of abuser too, in that
mm,
sense. And the whole time you're just pounding yourself down, just pounding yourself down, keeping yourself just locked up, and it's like you couldn't be free. But I
mm,
think it's amazing that people can be free now. And
mm.
I think I should be glad for it, but I feel what you're feeling. It's like, I mean, if I can go back in time and tell myself just to be more queer, be yourself. Don't censor yourself. Don't hold back on what makes you cringe, what you think people are going to cringe about. You know,
Yeah, I uh for some reason it just reminded me because we're talking about youth, and absolutely I totally agree with you. And this reminds me of another topic, tangent, but when I see a lot of organizations that focus on supporting the LGBT community, I see a lot of support for youth and for the elderly. And in between, I find it almost non-existent, like it's very limited. And it just, for some reason, it angers me
really?
because I'm like, hey, like it's not all about the youth, it's not about all the elderly. Like there's a lot of people that are like kind of like went through this generation that need tons of support, mental health, whether they're HIV positive or they are, survivors of, domestic violence, or who knows. But like it seems like that's because it's a shiny thing, like it's what they can write on grants, and they can like, I don't know, put a I don't know where I'm going with this, but like it just makes me angry, like just the gap in like the support in that particular segment of the experience of LGBT community.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of them like want to stay polished in a way. They
Mm,
don't want to deal with us messy middle-aged people.
yeah.
They don't want to deal with our complexity or the fact that we survived. We actually survived with a lot of without that support. Or we see the support. The support was there, like in the cities, but out of shame or fear, you couldn't reach it. Like it's right there, but I don't want anyone to see me drive by there. Kind of stuff. That's how you had. It's like a sense of survival. And you got to keep yourself hidden And yeah, we're kind of left to our own devices, go out to pasture, enjoy yourself. And when you're old, come back to us,
Yeah, when you're not like able to do anything,
Yeah,
and
we'll,
it's
we'll give you a t-shirt and a blanket,
you just gotta laugh. Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad that yeah you're yeah you feel me. But like yeah, it's nice to talk to somebody who's like of the same sort of around the same generation. But I want to go back to well, I want to ask you about continuing to share where you grew up in that. But before I do that, and before I forget, as we're talking about this, the survival and who our heroes are. The flip side of the question that sometimes I ask is, who are the villains that, um, fictional or otherwise, that maybe you, I don't know, maybe you not necessarily want to be like them, but there's an element of them that give you a sense of, I don't know, I wish that if I had more of that, I or maybe I see a reflection of myself. And for me, as we were talking about this, sometimes uh for I remember the movie The Devil Wears Prada, with Miranda, and she's just like so like she's the villain in that movie, but there's something about like the opposite of like sometimes I feel myself feeling helpless and being just run over and just having that kind of power. And is there something about that that really attracts me to just assert myself? And or other villains were like in comic books, like they might have certain superpower, like I wish that if I could be a villain, I could be that character. Like to yeah turn the question to you, like if is there somebody like a villain or like a character or like a quality that you think would interest you?
I always had like when I was, I think I had a fantasy of like when I felt powerless of being this like mysterious kind of like character. And the villain that I really like kind of got into, and I thought it'd be amazing to have these abilities, was an old movie, The Cell, with J Lo, when she goes into the mind of the serial killer. The serial killer's alter ego in that was amazing. It just felt powerful, like he was in control of his domain. And it was a disturbing domain nonetheless, but it was visually stunning. And in a way, it felt like I don't want to be the killer, but the power of ruling this strange, bizarre kingdom and to smote my enemies within it, was like always, tantalizing, So sometimes you feel like when you feel powerless, like in this fantasy that a realistic world where I'm some wealthy man and this is the life I live. I sit on this throne, this self-made throne, and it would be like my vengeance in a way, just to have these abilities and powers to manipulate the environment, the servants that you would have, these strange characters that would serve your needs and be like limitless in your power, so like there would be nothing to fear from anybody that would trample upon you, and just the throne, his throne room, with his attachments and the gowns that he was wearing was just, just this intimidation, just to be able to stand before your enemies, with that power. So I was like, kind of had a tinge of that with a little bit of the tall man from the old Phantasm movies, you know. Sometimes when I used to get angry and I was young, I would just have these fantasies with these bullies that I could just summon those spears and just send them right at people, And sounds
Mm.
silly, but in a weird way, it's like that darkness that's kind of attractive,
Mm.
because they are in control. These are beings that have really no fear of anything else.
Yeah, I was gonna say what I was reading as you were saying that was the words freedom, and there's like liberating, and just even the way that the imagery, to create this lavishness, like it's the opposite of having like restrictions or like having lack of means or like poverty or like just limitations. That is just you just have this unlimited, like you can spread your whatever, and you're so like occupy the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wish I could have a life where I don't have to worry about bills and stuff, to have the blessings that's just in the background, where I could just be a poet and
Mm.
just enjoy the things I enjoy, rock collecting or whatever I'm doing that day, and not have to be burdened by the fact that I have to labor in order to make this money, to buy these things that I need, and then the things that I want, and then this cycle and this endless cycle of just, you're not really enjoying yourself. You're
Mm.
not really, you're just working home, and then when you're lucky, you can afford something, you know, and just like kind of like going forward. But it would be nice to have that life where you don't have to worry about that. But unfortunately, in this world, the way we have structured it, not many of us can reach that wonderful, have everybody do everything for you while you get to be yourself, you know.
Yeah, I have this fantasy of being uh I remember an exchange that I had with you, and I sent you my poetry, and you mentioned something about like, because I think I was asking you, I forget what I asked you, but I was asking you something about like the style that you might like pick up from in some of the things that I was structuring. And I remember you mentioned something about like reminded you of surrealism in Latin America literature. And I was like, oh, I never thought about that, but since then I had this fantasy of like, what would it be like if I can just, that's all I did.
Yeah,
Just like explore, get paid to explore surrealism in Latin America literature. Like just it's not a practical thing. It's just like because I just want to do it.
absolutely. I would, I have all this fantasy. I think I call it the PBS fantasy. I wanted to be that travel writer on the trains, going through the world, and writing fantastic prose, and describing my world, the smells, the textures, and experiencing the different cultures. And I was like, why do they get to do it? Why can't I get to do that life? That Rick Steves life, I can do the personal essay here and there, I mean, like, it would be just fantastic, that nomadic, and like you said, Latin American surrealism, if they still had running trains everywhere, going from town to town throughout, Mexico or Central America to discover those hidden poetic treasures, of the early Mexican surrealist tradition, a lot of it lost, yeah, that would be amazing. That would be an amazing life, Still have
Yeah.
that fantasy, but
Yeah,
maybe
and
that's,
it's
yeah.
usually a white guy or like but I would love to see that show, Joseph Delgado like narrating. That would be so much more colorful, or colorful is not even the right word. It's like I don't just multi-dimensional. Like I would definitely, I would love to see that experience. But going back to the your where you grew up, and the other thing that I noticed in your I was looking at your bio and well what's out there, and then I saw a description of how you are from Albuquerque, right, New Mexico,
Yep.
and notice that it mentions how you were born and raised along the banks of the Rio Grande. And then you also mention that now you live in Western Arizona, and that you reside along the banks, if that's still true, of the Rio Colorado in the Mojave Desert. And I noticed there's a theme here of a body of water, of river. And that also caught my eye because I have growing up, I have a connection to growing up around the river and what that meant for me formatively in my childhood, and has a lot of imagery and memories of playing with my cousins. And even though growing up with nothing, growing up poor, but I every summer it would rain and I would go to the river because it would be overflowing with water, and like that's where we would swim. And it was like one of the happiest memories that I have of this, watching this almost sometimes crystal blue water and just like the freshness of the water like coming down the mountains. And and it's such a contrast to what I've experienced here in when I came to Southern California, especially in LA, where you have especially kids of black and brown kids that don't even have access to any nature, and they just all they know is like within the schools, the asphalt. Like it's such a weird thing for me to have seen the first time that I experienced it, coming from like, well, I didn't come from anything, from much not anything, and I didn't have anything, but I had like this access to this just amazing landscape of nature, and getting lost in the hills. And we would go to with my neighbors and my relatives. Sometimes they have in Spanish ganado, they have with the cows and the donkeys, and go to their plot of land and have that experience and just spend the whole day. So I have all these memories. So I wanted to ask you about like what the significance is of this river theme that you have in growing up, and also um along with that, like what's the like favorite part of experiencing where you grew up, and maybe the least, or the thing that you hated the most about growing up where you grew up.
Well, yeah, I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, born and raised, lived there up until 2004. Um, the Rio Grande River is a central part of Albuquerque's identity. It runs right through the center of the town. And I'm very happy that our elders had some foresight to make a preserve along the river in New Mexico and make it like a protected park. So we have the bosque, the old cottonwood forest that has been preserved. And so that's an instrumental part of Albuquerque's identity, is this right in the center of this town, this green belt of a cottonwood forest that runs to the city, with this ever-changing river. And when I was growing up, the Rio Grande was, of course, we've all get to see climate change in real time. So we all have the memories of these rivers being much more fuller than we see them today. The Rio Grande was always a raging river when I was a kid. And we didn't swim in the river. It was too dangerous. Our elders always, drownings were very common in Albuquerque. Some of the best swimmers would get ripped under with these currents. And so it became more of a preserve to walk around, to enjoy. And all my life, my father always took us down, like almost every weekend, down to what we call the Bosque trails, and just walk along the banks of the Rio Grande, and walk, on these little, mostly animal paths. They weren't actually human paths. You could tell that they would form through the grass, so that the wildlife would make these trails, and we would just walk through them. And that's probably my favorite part of the city, is the banks of the Rio Grande. Unfortunately, now from what I hear, it's just sad. It's just dried up. Never seen it like that before. It used to flood occasionally, but now the Rio Grande is disappearing. And I think it's important because as a kid, I remember some of the most happiest times being in the Bosque, being at the Rio Grande Nature Center, being there. They have the thing called Tingley Beach. It's an actual man-made lake that's adjacent to the river, but it's been there for generations, that it's like an integral part of everybody in Burke, has gone to Tingley Beach, and gone down to the river. And a lot of the big city events happen on the river. We have boat races for charity and stuff like that are annual. But lately they haven't had them because there's no water, And I think my least favorite part of the city is the ever encroachment upon what we had left. Albuquerque was so willing to decimate the Petroglyph National Monument and cut right through it just for development. Is one of the saddest things I've ever seen. I grew up knowing those roads didn't even exist. I remember the West Mesa pretty much untouched, the lava rocks everywhere, the desert. And my grandfather used to take us out there because he was a poor man, but he was really good at electronics, and he would salvage things that people would dump out there. And he called it his pick and save. Yeah, I'm going to go to pick and save. So I was guess pick and save. And any VCR, TV, radio he would find, bring them back, fix them up. And that's how he had his TVs. You know, they were salvaged from the desert. And now that you go back, there's no sign of any of that desert because it's just track homes, shopping centers. And it's this amazing. And that's what I think I hate about Albuquerque is our willingness there to pave over everything. Just there's no reverence for our history no more, you know, and we destroyed pretty much everything that our elders left for us, you know, but the one shining grace is that forest, you know, but we pretty much just keep encroaching. And I think we lost that desert connection. We just pushed it out. We just got rid of it, put it at the back of our head there, you know, and I think that was the saddest part there. And then moving out here to the Colorado River has been a completely different change because it isn't urbanized as you would find along the Rio Grande or any other big river. You know, there's small little communities. You know, the desert's still pretty much the dominant, you know, beast around here, you know, still fights against humanity here. But I'm also watching this river dwindle away as well. And it's kind of sad, you know, and you kind of start wondering where the river's going and will they be here, you know, in the future, you know, and how does that work with our identity? You know, what do we have left in Albuquerque to say then when the Rio Grande is no longer the Rio Grande? You know?
What's with your grandfather when he would take those electronics? Was he like trained on fixing electronics, or was he?
According to my grandfather, he was self-taught. I guess during the war, he tried to enlist, but he was too young. They didn't let him. And he already had two brothers already in the war. So he ended up, I guess, in California working for a McDouglas aircraft. What he did at McDouglas, I really couldn't tell you. I don't remember what he told me he did, but he was an amazing mechanic. And I think it was all self-taught. You know, he was a young teenage father. I mean, my grandfather had kids at 13. You know, he never finished school. So grew up in the 30s and 40s, you know, and started raising kids in the 40s and on, you know, and I could watch him take apart a carburetor and rebuild it like nothing, you know, and he had this knack for electronics and he would have his little soldering gun and he just knew it. He couldn't explain to me what each of those circuits did, but to him, he knew what they did. He just couldn't verbalize to me like in a way I could understand what they actually did, what transitioners are and whatever the technical stuff is. But he just knew what to do. And the stuff he couldn't salvage, how he entertained me and my cousin at the time was give us just a screwdriver and let us take apart the VCR screw by screw, you know, to keep us entertained for hours. But most of our electronics in that household were all salvaged, you know, and this amazing ability to fix TVs and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because it's very I don't know what the word is, eerily or just very. So my grandfather was exactly like that. And I'm wondering if it's a Mexican thing or if it's like it's a generational thing or what, because I also have stories of my grandfather who wasn't taught, we understand was self-taught. Like he would take apart the iron to iron clothes, the machines, or like he would take in those days you would go to the mills, to the molinos, because like the women would take the corn, you know, freshly from the fields and like take it to make the masa to the molino. And sometimes like the molino needed maintenance, so he would take apart the components and fix things, or even same carburetors or parts of cars from like those old cars from the, you know, his generation. We just take them apart and just or also like grabadoras or other more modern things, same thing, like just had that mind of. And I don't even know how somebody would do something like this, but just like have the mind of taking it apart and then just like figuring out on his own what was not working and then just like put it back together. And then people from the neighborhood would just start to know that, oh, that's the guy that like fixes things, so let's take him to him. So I remember like, because I got the fortune of knowing him when I was little. And I do have some of those images of like, the señoras or the other people coming to him and be like, oh, Don Jose, like, can you fix my thing or whatever? And he would just take it. And, he was definitely now that I have more of a lucidity of memories looking back, I have a fuller, I feel like I have a fuller picture, although I wish that I had more understanding of who he was as a person. But I could tell that's, to me, that's a sign of a really high IQ, or like just very super intelligent person. And he was also very troubled. He was alcoholic, probably some mental health issues there. I don't know what diagnosis like in modern times he would have, but I'm pretty sure they had a few. Um, but it's so interesting. Yeah, you mentioned that because it reminds me so much of my own grandfather too.
Oh yeah, he was amazing. I was very fortunate to have most of my life with him. He was my grandparents were who we were left off in the morning because my parents worked so early that we had the place to go before school. And my grandfather was the one that would take us to school, and sometimes they would watch us after school, so he was an ever presence and amazing man. I mean, yeah, he was just as complicated, and he was Jose too. And he just, he was amazing because he could build things out of nothing. And I just never comprehended how mechanically he could just look at these parts. And I remember him using an old compressor from a refrigerator and making his own tire air machine, using these compressors and all these weird components. And he made us go-karts out of old lawnmowers, so it's like this amazing technicality that I don't even have the skills. I can't even come close. You put me in a junkyard and I just see metal, I'm like, what's that? My grandfather, he could see what he could build from it. And I kind of
Mm.
wish I paid attention more to the skill set because I was more in the background being a little travieso, messing around with stuff rather than paying attention to what he was doing.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an element of that, because as you're describing taking things apart, it kind of reminds me actually of the way that you take words, and you're very like, you like to tinker with things, and you like deconstruct them and like put them back together. I wouldn't be surprised there's like an element of that that comes from your lineage.
Absolutely. Just taking apart that line, making it my own, basically,
Mm.
like, why can't these two words fit together?
Hmm.
Why can't I describe this with this? I didn't understand these rules when you go to, creative writing classes. Well, you got to construct, an image, but why can't an image just be one word? Why can't a sentence just be one word? Why do I have to put a period at the end of the sentence? Why not a dash? And so like, I have this inclination to break apart this stuff, this formality. I got tired of being read, what did sound like poetry, but it was told it was poetry and it was supposedly the greatest poetry, and felt like I was reading more of a short story or like a laundry list of things rather than beautiful images. Like I wasn't connecting with the language they were using. So I wanted to take that and just twist it apart and break it apart and put it in different unconventional ways. And so when I write poems, sometimes I break up the space as well, because the way the poem comes to me with the language, it's like coming through a fog, so it's disjointed. The image comes from this direction, and then the second part of the image comes from this direction. And I play with it on the page sometimes, and then the way it comes off my tongue and the way I hear it in my ear has to have like this cadence, and I found this interesting way to play with language. And how I do that is I avoid abstractions at all costs. And it's been a discipline of mine not to write anything that uses abstract language. So I don't use words like love or feeling, I won't name an emotion, but I'm trying to use concrete language to express that same emotion and then break it down into a way that I'm describing it metaphorically with kind of like these strange little enjambments of weird images, taking like basically taking the dark and the light and then slamming them together to make it more complete, you know,
Mm,
because I
yeah.
think that's part of the completeness is recognizing that little bit of cringy darkness, the undertones sometimes with desire or lust or experience, you know.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I, yeah, thank you for that. It strikes me that when you say make it your own, it's also been a something of philosophy that I've come to embrace embrace more, especially as I've over the years I've embraced more of who I am, my queer identity, and all that process, and just and like you're saying, embracing the things that like you're taught to be ashamed of, or and there's like a lot of shame around that, and but also realizing just once you ease off of it, or like what you provide gives you allow yourself to have more space and have that liberation, or like that expansiveness, you start to realize just how powerful you actually are, you can be, and you actually are. Because it reminded me too of, so the grandfather I described was from the one that was very mechanically oriented, very smart. That's from my dad's side, and then from my mom's side, also had the fortune of meeting him, and he was also equally um, very intelligent, and also very troubled, also alcoholic. But my grandfather from my mother's side, he was more of an artist. He was also self-taught. He We have this story, and I got to see had the fortune of getting to hear him play the violin, and he didn't know how to play it, but he made up notes, and he made the violin out of like just with his own hands.
Oh, wow.
Or yeah, or he was also a sculptor. He wouldn't call himself a sculptor, but he took like rocks that look like the kind of rocks that you find of like the Olmec kind of faces. He made a replica of it
Oh,
and
wow.
made it so well that this is the grandfather where my family is from, my mother's side, from San Miguel de Allende in central Mexico, and there's a lot of expats, quote unquote, and from the US, from Europe, and one of this Americanos, like one of these white guys that was living down there when he was alive, my grandfather offered to buy it, to buy the sculpture that my grandfather made of this Olmec deity head. And my grandfather was said no, because he was afraid that it would, because it looked so like the replicas that he had made, that he was afraid that he would get into trouble, because especially over there is muy penado, like it's really heavily punished if you are found with architecture or archaeological artifacts that you've taken home, instead of like turning them over to the local government. So he was afraid that he would get mistaken by that. So that's why he refused to sell his sculptures. But he was just brilliant. And then also to boot, he was that's where I had my indigenous lineage, or who knows what else, but I know the one very specifically. He was from the Otomi people in central Mexico. He spoke the language, and um, he was the last one in the family that spoke it fluently. And it's feels makes me feel sad. But I have, as you were talking, it's just like my other grandfather was like coming through in my mind, saying like, see, like this is what I'm talking to you about. Like you have the tools, like you have the thing. Like, why are you feeling like you are less than like a trained, academically, taught person as an artist? Like look at the all the things that they don't have that you have. It reminds me of that.
Absolutely. And I think back when you just said that now, as some of the greatest creators in the world didn't have what we would call an academic career. Never heard of high school. Some of the early American writers, most of them were, you know, left home at age 13, went into the wilderness and wrote about their experiences later on. They searched for their own identity that way, and so I don't feel so bad about not worrying about academia, and just like you said, our grandfathers are the inspiration that they can survive and be mechanical geniuses with little or no formal instruction, because essentially, if you go back farther enough, there had to be someone just like them to figure this shit out in order to create an academy to teach other people. There's someone from scratch that learned themselves to create these machines, so it's this ongoing tradition of this like self-taught machinist in a way, it's engineers, that they needed in order to formalize an engineering degree, so it's like this weird strangeness that these unrecognized geniuses lived amongst us, and they continue to live amongst us, and we don't see them anymore, these
Mm,
complicated, messy people that we love. They're a part of our history, and
yeah.
like you said, my grandfathers were troubled young fathers,
Mm,
and you hear the horror stories that they were perfect parents, they were great grandparents, but I'm pretty sure they had their faults, and I'm pretty sure they have their dark closets and stuff like that, their complications, but we do too,
yeah.
and I don't know if we're better off with the tools, if we have better tools to deal with that, or if we have a more open society where we can able to unpackage our trauma that they weren't able to, you know, a life that
Mhm.
they weren't able to negotiate, basically, you know, they kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, I think that's what troubled them is I kind of felt the sense that they felt all stuck. There was no choice, you know, they did what they did to survive, and that was it. But our generation, that we were able to be a little more expansive in our reach, I think sometimes my grandfathers wouldn't understand my approach to academia. I don't think they would see the utility in it. You know, I'm
Mm,
reading great books all day. It's like, what kind of skills do you have?
yeah.
So,
What were some of your uh subjects that you studied and like you would were there specific certain subjects or areas that really called your attention that really excited you like for me I anthropology was like one that really grabbed me immediately. So a lot of whether it's anthropology of religion or like linguistics or like I just love, or even as I expanded into philosophy and all these different subjects. But are there like subjects like that for you that sort of uh, even more ignited your now as you put together your poetry or like inform it or influence it or yeah anything that excited you?
uh, I think I'm obsessed with archaeology, just obsessed with it. Can't get enough of Southwest archaeology. I'm just fascinated with my ancestors. We have a complicated, messy Southwest history past our family. Warfare. We're essentially direct descendants of two worlds colliding. You know, uh, we call it, and Albuquerque, we have a joke about being Chicanos. Half of us are trying to steal the other half's gold, and then our other half is trying to burn the other half's churches down. And it's like this conflict inside you, because the messy history we come from.
Mm-hmm.
Our ancestors weren't the greatest people, and they didn't make good choices. And the other part of our ancestry had to endure these very terrible choices, And it's like this unspoken, under the rug, kind of under the surface in New Mexico. You kind of still feel that tension. They call it New Mexican culture, but it's essentially, indigenous culture with a little bit of European flair, and it's almost like we don't want to talk about that. We're living in a city that was where countless people were murdered and burnt alive in their pueblos right here, just down the block, right underneath us. There were our people too, and we're a descendant of who knows what the war did to our people and our bloodlines. A lot of our history is gone, and it's really sad because we know we're indigenous and we know we're Spanish, but how they came together and where we came from in this valley, has been lost to history because it's been erased and forgotten and built over, and this constant tension, And so archaeology has been this fascination to know that my whole life I was living in a neighborhood that was built on an ancient, big, large pueblo where for generations, countless thousands of people lived their lives, created artwork, sung songs, spoke poetry. And, so I think that helps influence my work because sometimes the way I spread the words on the page, looking down, looks like a foundation, like a archaeological foundation. All we have left is the roots of the walls, in a way, like a trace pattern, and in a way, that archaeological pursuit and fascination is kind of like excavating into my brain, just going deeper and deeper to the root of these images that are popping in my head, that need to come out on the page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard the word resiliency, and also I am. I want to talk about our grandmothers since we spent so much time talking about our grandfathers. Because the word resiliency comes through. I think for me, it was also striking me how there's like this talent and like curiosity and putting things together from like my grandparents, my grandfathers, and then but the more of that like fire is and sort of resiliency and strength. I as I am reflecting now, it feels like that comes more from my grandmothers. Both of them are very strong-willed individuals. From both my dad's and my mom's side. My from my dad's side actually has a interesting history of being born in Morris, Kansas, as a when she was born by sort of by accident because the family would come and work on the railroads and then go back. So it just happened during one of those times out in the field that she was born. But she grew up all her life in Mexico and only came here in Southern California towards the later part of her life, like elder years. And my my grandmother from my mom's side in San Miguel de Allende also was a person that didn't go to school, didn't even know how to read and write, but was just a very powerful woman. And I have she would tell me this story of how they didn't have water in her like neighborhood, and she went to the el ayuntamiento, to the local authorities, and because of her pushing and prodding and all that, they got potable water from from the local government. And till the day she died, she was like very recognized by the local neighborhood as like, oh, is it she's like one of the elderly sort of figureheads of the neighborhood. And also her mom, who I also had the fortune of meeting, my bisabuelita, my great grandmother. She was a soldadera with the Pancho Villa army in those days, and I never got to meet my great grandfather because they split. The history goes that he quit the army and then just lost touch, and then I think at some point they split, and then my great grandmother just lived the raised my grandmother and her other child alone. But this great grandmother was also a very strong-willed individual. She was a curandera. She made people afraid of her because nobody messed with her. It wasn't those older, very strong-willed. Even I hear stories of even my grandfather being afraid of her because like when he would drink and start being abusive to my grandmother, my grandmother would go and call on my great grandmother, and there would come Big Mama comes over, just like just like she was the one that he was afraid of, like terrified of. So a very powerful woman. And yeah, I just sometimes like I'm a very laid back person, and but sometimes I surprise myself just how like it I can turn and just be like there's something that kind of takes over. It's just like, it's very firm, you know, and just be like, and just like, I just have to, I don't know. It's something that is, it's from before me that I feel like I'm getting from my grandmother. So we'd love to hear from you, like what, yeah, your grandmothers, what role they played and what they were like, if you got the fortune. Yeah.
My two grandmothers on both my mom's and dad's side were, I would call, frontier women. It's how they were born in small towns, little villages outside Albuquerque city limits, and rough, rough life. Both my grandmother's mothers were orphans that were found in eastern New Mexico on the plains. There's rumors that they were Apache, but they don't know. Unfortunately, they were given Spanish names and sent off to be domestic servants. And you hear the history of my great grandmothers, they became domestic servants early on, where through that they met their husbands who would become my great grandfathers, and then moved to different towns like Bernalillo, New Mexico for my mother's side, and my father's side from Corrales, New Mexico, across the river. You hear about the tough lives. They were usually, my mother's mother was a single child, as far as she knows. Her mother was an alcoholic, very neglectful, lived in Albuquerque and left my grandmother to be raised by her grandmother, who was an orphan herself, and tough frontier ladies that carried around shotguns and rifles, because of the rattlesnakes. You hear stories about them always going out and shooting the snakes, and even stories having firefights with other people. My great grandmother on my maternal grandfather, his mother, had told him stories that when she was a young girl at age 10, she had to open a flap in the cabin in Peña Blanca, New Mexico, and shoot back on some raiders who had come onto the farm while her father was away. And she remembers shooting someone, at frontier kind of justice. And she had to remember how they dealt with the body or who it was, but kind of gives you a background on how tough these women were. And it translated to kind of emotional, distant women, very firm, didn't like children. Children were to be seen and not heard. Less loving than the grandfathers. The grandfathers were more like spoil the kids. The grandmothers had no time for that. They were usually the cooks and the cleaners, and that was occupied their time, and they kicked us out of the house when they did it. We weren't allowed, near them. Very tough ladies. They were the disciplinarians. They were the voice of the family, and definitely the spine. When grandfather spoke, that was exactly what grandmother told him to say, for any kind of family drama or any kind of discipline, and so my memory of my grandmothers are tough, mean old ladies that I never hugged any of them. They don't hug children. There was like toughness, and it makes you think of how rough their life must have been. Growing up, they had to grow up fast, and they didn't have a childhood. My grandparents had their first kids when they were 13 and 14. So their life as teenagers, that we would have had the chance to experience, they didn't have that. Little to no formal education for most of my grandmothers and the great grandmothers, but tough women. Every story I hear about the great grandmothers, I didn't really meet them, but from what I hear about them, they were big women that could carry the old school washing machines down the steps every day, did, tough stuff. And there's stories about them too, having abused, my great grandfather's being abusive. And there's a story that my great grandfather had beat up my great grandmother here in Needles, California. They were railroaders too. They moved along the lines, and apparently, she let it go for a week, I was told, and made him this delicious dinner one night, chili and beans and homemade tortillas. And my uncle said that he witnessed that while he was eating, she asked him, is that delicious? Oh, it's delicious and all that. And he said, next thing you know, she came up behind him with a cast iron pan and knocked him over the head and knocked him out into his bowl of chili. And they said ever since that day, that man never laid a hand on that woman, so it tells you like this, that was her survival, she, the kind of lady, and they've said that you never wanted to get slapped by her, you can feel your teeth get loose, From what I hear from my mom too, that they were tough disciplinarians. you know, and
Mm.
that was instilled in us too. My grandmother inherited that cleanliness above all, order. You know, there was an order to everything. And when we were present, we should just keep our mouths quiet, you know, just stay still, you know, like furniture. And it was kind of a weird dynamic in that sense, you know, like, and I think that's where we also lost our language in our family. Like Spanish
Mm.
has completely been lost because our elders only spoke it to keep secrets from us.
Mm-hmm.
So when people switched to Spanish as a kids from early on, that means they were talking family drama. You know, it was for adults only, you know, and I kind of feel sad about that we became more pocho than anything because of that, because language is more of like a secret language, you know, in our family now, you know, pretty much sadly, you know, not many of the kids picked it up, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could pass the Spanish 101 course, but I probably couldn't get further than that, you know, but yeah, just to give you an idea, like just tough ladies, you know, and that's how I remember them early on, just really mean. I didn't really like being around them. You know, my dad's mother was never one to like us. You know, she was very distant. We only saw her once a year all our life. Uh, she didn't care for us because I think she didn't care for my mother. But, you know, she lived her whole life and passed on, and we were never the wiser, you know. So kind of weird that way, you know. It was the grandfathers that showed the love,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah.
That's what's weird, you know. The grandmothers, I didn't feel that, you know.
Yeah, that's also fascinating. So much uh it makes me realize I'm so glad I'm talking to you too, because this is actually a little cathartic in a way, because I am feeling like, oh, I'm not like, the history of my family is not the only one like this. It's like, oh, there's like, this is a whole thing that like, that this is how people lived in, I mean, I don't know if it's like a regional thing, like in the Southwest or like what, but just so many themes that you're describing, so familiar. And so many of the things that you mentioned, like the emotional distance. I also wonder about like also how that gets passed down, you know, and affects the family. Like what you describe in the scene with, you know, not really having sitting down to eat together. And like to this day, like even in my own family, we do that sometimes, but it's not like a natural, like there's almost like feeling like you don't know how, you know, like talk to one
Yeah.
another, or like just be like, we're just gonna hang out and talk about, like, enjoy each other's company like we do, but there's like a awkwardness around it. And
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah. Even to this day, I mean,
Mm.
I don't know how to communicate with my family
Mm.
effectively without it ending into an argument,
Mm.
you know, or just like a bitter silence, you know, that
Mm.
awkward silence, you know. And I
Yeah.
find myself dismissing myself from parties really quickly when I do go to events, you know. It's just, I don't know what to say to my family. And I don't know if it's because being young and queer, you compartmentalize yourself, you know, the queer self that goes to the background, and the Joseph Delgado that everyone expects, you know,
Mm.
is present. And eventually you run out of material with that fake personality, you know. It's like,
Mm.
and your real self has bonded with your chosen family, you know, your friends, the people that you can trust. So you want to be with them more dynamically. So after all these years, you really don't know your family. You know, it's essentially like we're strangers that
Mm-hmm.
are blood related, you know, and that's how it's been feeling like at different funerals. Sadly, you know, it's like, I love my family, but we don't know each other, you know, and
Mm.
I think it's that communication, you know, that we just don't have. We're not willing to talk about things, you know, and it's a family that will sweep things under the rug, you know, and best left unsaid, but no one's unpackaged their drama or trauma for generations, you know. And I don't know what kind of trauma my grandmothers went through where they have solidified, you know, and built walls the way they built walls, you know, and the alcoholism that ran through the family, you know, and drug addiction, we know didn't help, you know, and it still doesn't help, you know. And I think we became used to this dysfunctional form of communication where attention was drama. Attention was violence. Attention was anger sometimes, you know, and that makes it where it's positive attention becomes awkward. You know, it's kind of like, you know, I tell people, I was like, the first time my father hugged me, I graduated from high school and it was weird. It's like, what are you doing?
Mm.
You know, kind of thing, like, you know, like you kind of pull sidewards, awkward hug, you know, it's like, that's how it was weird in my household, you know, it's like, and then seeing other people who actually had more dynamic family life, you know, it's kind of weird for me, you know, because I'm not close to my family in that sense. You know, I don't, you know, that's going to be something I'm going to be working with for a long time, you know, but,
Hmm.
you know, it's the reality of it, you know, and it's kind of sad, but you see it as you hear stories about family history, how it's just been like that for generations, you know, families that break apart, and that's how they ended up in the towns they ended up in, you know, moving around to different states and stuff like that, you know. So,
Yeah, I yeah, so much of that I wonder with the emotional distance and the alcoholism. I have a theory that a lot of alcoholism behind it was mental illness of some sort, like either a strands of personality disorders or narcissism or other things that were just people were just self-medicating because there weren't really resources or just people didn't have an understanding. And all of this feels uh sad. There's a grief, and I think also uh maybe that's why I'm like feeling this melancholy, and even in like your now as I'm reflecting to is like when I write too, like that melancholy comes out, or like that grief, there's like a grief element to it. I'm wondering, as we um the thing that I wanna that I've been struggling with for a long time is how to what to do with that, like in terms of like in the sense of like moving forward, like we and I know that, for example, I can take action and like find ways to support my mental health and like work on certain things that like are either my relationships or whatnot. I can control myself, but I don't have control over other people. um but the things that I have control on myself about how I um address certain situations in my life, part of that has been lately how what I feed my mind with and how I process emotions. And I'm trying to balance the two. And so what I mean by that is there like do you think there's like a balance to reach? Or maybe this is the wrong way of looking at it. Because my fear is that sometimes when I'm like exploring darkness and shadows, then somehow I'm gonna get stuck in that. Like that I won't find a way to like I'm making myself feel sad and like grief and like there's an element to it, but like I want to do it only to a certain degree because I want to like jolt myself. I wanted to have it a purpose to being able to explore the things that make me happy and like the things that like are me, like my authentic self, and like things that bring me joy and all those different things. Like I want to reach a balance, but I always struggle. Um another example of this is like when you like what I choose to feed my mind. So like Halloween is right around the corner, and I used to love for example horror movies, and now I've actually stopped watching them because in my mind there's like elements of it that like I could be using my time in a more constructive way of like feeding myself things that are gonna um help me with my emotional state, as opposed to like giving me anxiety and like just for the sake of giving me anxiety. But I don't know. Yeah, I just like I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but like I struggle with like how to reach that balance between exploring those shadows and not staying there, or like if I'm too afraid of what may happen, if that makes sense.
no, absolutely. You know, it's digging deeper. They say going deeper into the forest, it gets darker and darker, Uh, it is a tricky balance, but I look at it when I go deep into those memories, even the cringe memories, even though where I was the villain, you know, I have to be able to face it because I wouldn't be where I am without that experience, unfortunately. You know, uh, I can't reverse time and change it because it would change everything about me now. My personality was developed with learning these terrible lessons. Uh, Even the bad things, and they are traumatic, bad things, but I have to be able to look at them and recognize, yes, they left me a scar, but that scar helped propel me to the moment I am here now, willing to look back at that scar, you know, and not fetishize and not, no, no, be nostalgic about it necessarily. And that's where I think you get in trouble is
Mhm.
when you start being nostalgic or you start second guessing your decisions that you clearly can't change now, and I feel myself getting to that point sometimes, where I I tell people it like kind of burns you in the ass, you want to go back in time to assert yourself at that moment, to change that dynamic, to make that situation either better for yourself, you know, but then all I would be doing is just kind of cleansing my messy history without addressing it, and I don't want to whitewash over my history. I've done some stupid shit, and I have to be able to face the fact that I did that stupid shit because I learn my lesson from doing that stupid shit? Yes. You know, will I do it again? I can't guarantee that. I can't give you an answer on that. But what I kind of do is try to be a better person by looking at this darkness and recognizing, looking at it from different angles and distancing myself from it, So when I go back to these kind of terrible memories, I kind of put myself in a museum where I'm putting that memory into a stand and kind of just looking at it more in a different angle. Like, well, maybe I'm not seeing my memory from this point. And so I just move it, to try to see, was there anything beautiful in there at all? And kind of leads into poetry where, yeah, the scene that I'm setting up is dark and it could be toxic and abusive. But what I'm looking at is something that's in the scene that is kind of the light in a way, like a spark. And I want you to see that too. That yes, this traumatic event happened and it's disturbing, but it's foundational. It's like a
Mhm.
brick. And I really don't want to paint over this brick, nor do I want to like go back into the brick, but just recognize the brick is there.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah, I
if that
love
makes
that.
sense.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think yeah, that's beautiful. And I say it's beautiful because it almost shows um it's like it it's showing your beauty, what makes you beautiful, and that what makes you beautiful is your scars, like your what makes you you, and the thing that you're just saying with the light, and there's light in that. um I think that's part of it, that it's this. I'm thinking of this luminescence of sorts that radiates, and the reason it radiates is because it's, again, it's expansive. It's embracing all of what you've been, all this road, and just, that it's things serve their purpose for certain things, uh for whether there were messy or there were mistakes, but there were lessons there, and there's something beautiful about that people can relate. And I it does remind me when I first started thinking about when we were gonna chat, and I've been having this song, the Frank Sinatra song, "I Did It My Way," or something. I sometimes that song will come in my mind. It will come in my mind like, I did it my way, and just with through it all and all, and just this old kind of timer sort of, like what else can you do? But at the same time, like this is exactly how it is to be,
Yeah,
for lack of a better word.
absolutely. It just reminds me of this addressing trauma, addressing the beauty of realization of trauma. That's hard to explain. I call it the Tori Amos effect.
Hmm.
I try to, like, when young poets ask me, what do you mean by expressing a trauma with beauty? And I said, it's Tori Amos has a song from her Little Earthquakes album at the end that's basically talking about her being raped and basically with a man on her back. And the song is not necessarily about the rape, it's about what she was thinking about when she was being assaulted. And she was thinking about butter biscuits and the cold grass. And her mind was elsewhere. And it makes you think this tension. She creates this unusual tension that goes back to like Ai Ogawa. Is she celebrating this sexual assault? Is she, how is she addressing this sexual assault? Why is she focused on these things rather than the pain she is feeling? And is she just ignoring it? Or is she looking back for some sense that this is a defining moment for her that propelled her into this image? So I lead people to that, to see that tension and make a decision on themselves what she's doing with those images. Why is Tori Amos presenting her rape in this fashion? And ask yourself as a poet, why am I presenting this darkness in this fashion then? I'm not trying to memorialize or fetishize or eroticize the situation. I am basically showing you a photograph, but I'm talking in the photograph about the tree in the background. And the
Mm.
photo may be of something pretty disturbing, but it's kind of like that. I call it that. I don't know other ways to call it, like Tori Amos effect, you know, uh, with having to address it. And she was willing to sing this song and create this image that this is what happened to me. But in these
Mm.
moments, still, I kept my humanity, and my power was thinking of things that I love, in a way, you know.
Hmm. It's almost like it's all of the above and none of the above. It's like there's like why are you even trying to put an explanation to it? It's just like you're saying a photograph. It's because ignoring it is has what's been making it so much worse.
Yeah.
And shining light on it is actually what heals. And there's something like not rational about that. It just happens.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that a lot of somatic therapies that um, have to do more with like what the body and like the experience of, as opposed to like this logical string of thoughts. So it's all of the above, in terms of like healing takes shape in different ways. It's not just like
Absolutely.
it. Yeah, it is talking about it. It is cognitive therapy and these things, but it's these other dimensions too. Like it has to happen in multiple, like your spiritual, your soul and your body, and like there's just because you're not one dimension. You're a full human being, multidimensional.
Oh yeah, we're a complex, you know, messy construction ourselves, and then how we build our public personalities, our private personas, it just gets even more messier.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, so I kind of see like our brain being like this neighborhood, and keeping our friends in the good part of the neighborhood, and not letting them go to the back alleys, to see what Joseph is really thinking about sometimes, you know, so yeah, the humanity of it,
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
and recognizing that, kind of reminds me of an old school saying, because my grandfather was really good at giving me these old wisdom sayings. And I remember one time he says, "It looks painful, doesn't it?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Remember that." you know, uh, Kind of like this straight up, life is going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. There's not always going to be someone there for you, and I think that's what poetry has been for me, is helping navigate that on my own sometimes, and being able to keep myself abreast of everything and not succumb, to wallow in, which is an inclination sometimes, when I'm getting sad, like think about different things, traumatic events, then I start getting into that filter where I start getting angry about it, but I should remember that I'm not going to waste my time now in the here and now going forward being angry about something, but I will look at it and I will say, okay, it's going to make my stomach turn sometimes, but, you know, just to acknowledge that, yeah, I got from there to here and then to here, but it wouldn't have been complete without seeing this.
Mm. I just got a mental image, and when you were describing, so I want to ask you about more about your process of writing poetry, because you were this reminds me what you were describing, it's like a fog, and like there's an image, and that's the first time that I've heard somebody else describe it, because that's how I start with something. Like I think of it, I think of images first, and I have to translate them into words, and that's a process for me. Uh, I do communications for a job, for a living, and I'm very good at taking other people's thoughts and interpreting them and putting them into words, and that can be very effective in delivering messaging. But for some reason, when I try to do it on myself, it's a struggle. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so I've discovered that if I turn it around and I think of the images first, or like the emotion, and then like I let it like sit there, and then eventually I start to think of like metaphors or things, like it start to express some of that feeling, because it's almost like feels like it's like has so many, it's like it's all wrapped up into like this ball, and like I can only peel like some layers. And so for me, like it takes time to like write it down, and I have to like I write it down and I have to like go back to it. So like it could be a process of like days, of like writing something. And I've talked to other folks that that's not the process. Their process is like they have to like get something just right on the page, and just like, then that's it. Like they don't like tinker with it. Like that's just how their mind works. And mine doesn't work like that. So yeah, I love to hear like your process of you started to describe like the images. Is it like you take over several days? Do you like um but not more than just functionally, yeah, just like how you approach the like a I've been interested in how comedians describe their like writing of jokes, like that. That's also very interesting to me. So yeah, if you could share like what your process is with the craft, and when you break it down, and all of those pieces that make it your style.
Oh, absolutely. So I try to free write every day. It's part of my I call it the Joe C's to daily living, but I try to do a free write. So I don't have a specific time. I'm not very disciplined on setting up time, but I'll set up like maybe 15 minutes of just writing and whatever is coming to my mind. And what I'm using the free write process for is just to get all this garbage out of my head. And I'm not thinking about what I'm writing, so I'm not trying to censor myself. I'm not trying to show off. I'm just taking this crap out of my head. Just writing. Sometimes it gets poetic. Sometimes it's just a litany of just words or phrases that are coming to my mind, and I just try to exercise that all out. In that process, I find as I get deeper into the free writing, somewhere along the line, an image comes to my mind. And it's not in the writing, it's in my brain, where I'm seeing like this fog of war, or like a foggy day, or like a smoke filled day, a short vignette image. It could be as simple as hands wrapping barbed wire across a piece of wood. And then that's it. And that's all I see. And that leads into like this flow about this barbed wire and this wood. Who is doing this? And sometimes then it starts popping different angles from the same image. Like the smoke clears and then you can see a glove, or the smoke clears and then you can smell something even in the image, like the smell of wood, and I noticed that like sense of smell is important in my work. I just obsessed with like a burning image And it's important for me to explain that smell on the page with the poem. And then that leads me into thinking about these images just popping in my head. And usually I'm not writing them down, I'm stewing them in my head and seeing how they fit together and what this scene is. And sometimes the scenes are actually, without me knowing, components of memory. Sometimes they're dreams, sometimes they're fantasy, and maybe a mix of all between, you know. I call it the unreliable narrator, but very beautiful images, you know. And I see these images come out, and then I start thinking about it, and it may lead to me writing something. And I'm like a poet that if it doesn't come out perfect the first time, I have failed. And so I find myself writing in this flow where it's like I'm composing and I'm rocking. It's like this cadence. And the images start flowing from that first image about the barbed wire. And I just keep going until I hear like this beat in my head. And it's hard to explain to people. It's like this final boom. There it is. It's done. The image is done. And I'll tinker with it, maybe change a word, add a comma, break a line apart or something. But I feel if I read it back to myself in my process, if I always have to read it back to myself. But if it doesn't catch my ear, there's no this sense of beat, or it just falls flat for me, then I destroy the poem and it's gone. I probably will never go back to that image again. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll lead into a different image, into a different poem. And it's kind of like in my brain, that barbed wire image is doing like a little cloud randomness of what's related to barbed wire: metal, tin, rust, thorn, cut, blood. And it's like this brainstorming activity is going that leads into sometimes a series of poems, sometimes really short poems, sometimes really long poems. And it's in the process of writing these poems sometimes that you start excavating even deeper, and a memory comes up. A memory that usually smells induce for me. And I'm really sensitive to smells of colognes and stuff like that, that just take me back to a certain moment, you know, from my childhood that gives me like this guttural feeling. And when I get that guttural feeling, that means it's important. I need to think about this moment, you know, and then I start writing even the deeper poems. I go into the less charismatic material, you know, that goes into talking about dark impulses or dark moments, you know, and then put it on the page. But like, I don't revise. I don't like to revise. And sometimes I have to walk away from the poems because I make myself sick with them. If I just have to just put them away for a month, you know, then I go back and read them. Sometimes I'll tinker with them. And sometimes I'm a wrathful creator, you know, they all fail me. And I tear them to pieces and start the process anew, you know. But I find myself going through this process maybe once a month. And it's almost like a mania. And I kind of wonder if I'm undiagnosed sometimes with mania, you know, because it's not a violent mania. It's like this thing, I'm compelled to write these things. And it's just like I'm composing. And I can fill whole notebooks, you know, writing like these weird, and then maybe they're related to each other, these poems. And I notice as I'm getting deeper into this book, they get darker and darker, you know, and it's kind of like a weird process. And the collections that I have produced come from that process, you know, and they're sometimes maybe jammed up with different series. Like the most recent collection is actually from 3 different series of writings that are much longer and expansive. But of course, the poems that didn't make it to the book failed me. And so they were pared down, you know, and so that's where you get this tension in the newest collection is the style, you know, because they were written at different times in different bursts of a couple of days, you know, and so sometimes I find myself in this mania where I've written 40 poems in one night. Maybe 10 of them will survive my eye and ear, you know, if I read them back and I don't like, you know, I hate repeating words. And I find myself sometimes I write a poem and I repeated the word light twice. And it ruins the poem for me and it has to go. You know, I just like a personal preference, you know. So like if I see that I repeated, oh, I used dirt already in this poem in the first stanza and I've used it in this. No, you know, unless it's intentional, more than not, it's not, you know. So that's one of my editing ears, you know, it's always my ear. And if it doesn't sound good to my ear, then it has to go.
Mm,
Kind of a
yeah,
weird.
thank you. Yeah, I love all of that. I think it's also making me realize too, as when you describe the fog, I am connected in my mind to um how trauma works, or how trauma is like when you are, let's say you in an accident and like you get hit by a car or something like that, and you're kind of like, it's just kind of like you're in shock, like that initial picture, or like that initial, like you're kind of just frozen in some ways. And it's like blurry. It's like it's a, whether you're spinning or like just things are kind of, but once you are able to like um make sense of things, then things start to come into focus, and you see like almost like the aftermath, or the like the what came out of it, or you're able to see, track back your steps, and like rearrange and make sense of things, and you're like, okay, you begin to ground yourself. And that's what it reminds me. And I think it's striking me too, because I can very much identify with, at least as I'm in, that's how I'm interpreting it. And I think that's why also part of the fear that comes up for me is that, because that's a scary place to like rather not think about certain things.
Yeah.
And but also realizing that there is a power in healing, in being able to, like, I don't know, just, it's almost like also too, like going at your own pace too. You're okay, I'm just gonna, I can see this, there's so much me behind it, but like I can deal with this like window that's coming up. For whatever reason, my body, my whatever's around me is like showing me this, because knows like this is what I can, this is the right moment for this to like come through me and
Yeah,
to have an expression.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, it's, yeah, it gives you like this window. I tell people it's like opening a drawer in your house and you find all these Polaroids, and you're just sifting through them, and they're giving you maybe just a short little frame of a bigger event, a small burst, maybe it's just a shadow, a blur, and that leads to that kind of exploration, deeper into this fog, this smoke. It's like a smoke fueled realm, like a flat land. Sometimes when I see them, these images, it's like I describe it sometimes as a cracked lake bed. It's really flat and expansive. And I can't see beyond like this smoke, this thick smoke. And it doesn't choke me out, but it's just there that whispers, but it's ever present. And occasionally it opens up to see, these strange objects or artifacts on this plane that lead you into these emotional memories, these resonances. And so it builds these images, and then you get lost in it. Like, is this memory? Is this fantasy? You know, it's important, like what's the significance of this object or this
Mm.
image that it's showing me through this smoke,
Mm. Yeah, thank you. Well, we to wrap it up, to maybe we could wrap it up, and we'd love if you have a poem that you like to share, or anything that you like to share to finish things, and just um if you want to talk about it, or anything that you want to share around it, um would be really welcome.
Okay. You know what? Going back to our grandmothers, I did write a poem about my paternal grandmother that came out in one of my first collections, Ditchwater. And it was a very difficult poem to write. Uh, Also, too, the way I titled it may seem offensive, but it wasn't to me. It's something I had to address and something to look. So it's called Dying Witch. She smells of camphor and cotton, skin red and moist, sweat, hot light slithering belly down through the alfalfa, air sweet, heavy on skin. Wrinkled and fat, she wrestles in her old skin in the sheets bones clanking, shuffling like a body coming undone. She wants out of the creased gowns of aged flesh, folded and bent, her thighs pooled and stretched, heat filled, gut swollen. She cries out, Dios mío, her voice low, like a hum of a radiator hiss or a moth breaking its body against a wind. Kind of a way to address her, you know, that hearing, of her end, really brought up some dark emotions with what I related to her, so that's why poetry is becoming my healing grace, is I can able to share that, through those images.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time and
Thank
for being
you.
so gracious for, weekend and
Oh,
all of
thank you for
that.
listening to my nonsense.
Yeah, well, I was really looking forward to this conversation. And I also want to say thank you for, I know you're just being you, but I am very grateful to you as another gay man and that just have sensibilities. And I just, as you can probably sense, I see a lot of myself in you. And just like we were talking earlier, would have been nice to have other people to talk to you that can understand you on this level. So it's so I can't even put into words like what I feel right now.
Awesome.
So yeah, I'm just really thank you for what you do. And yeah, I just, your poetry means a lot to me.
Oh, thank you
And
very much.
yeah. But anyways, well, thank you so much for your time, and we'll stay connected. And are you still going to be on the socials with
Yeah,
Bridgewater
for now,
Ghost?
for Twitter,
Okay.
the last Joseph from Twitter had to be drowned in a motel bathroom, understandably, but I'm back.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, thank you, Joseph. Have a good
Thank you.
rest
You
of
have
it.
a good day now.
Okay. Bye. So that was a really rich conversation. I hadn't realized just how much I actually shared in common with Joseph, and just was really amazed at the commonalities from our grandparents and the experiences that he shared and his memories of them. And also to be in coffee slut, as he put it, was definitely so enjoyable. And also just his perspective on so many things, and when he shared about the first poet he encountered as a young little joto, like he said, and the realization of brokenness and not being afraid of looking at it. And just what a beautiful way of really looking at it, looking at darkness and seeing moments of beauty, and just bringing the light and shadows into one and making things into our own. And, so many things again that just I so love about Joseph. And because yeah, I feel like I identify with him so much. Even when he shared about families, right? And families as a result of drama, trauma, inability to express our feelings, and learning um how to talk to one another, and just the difficulties that we have growing up in those environments. And then the topic of anger, and just finding a valid way to express anger without hurting people, right? Um and then opening up that door to uh finding out or seeing queerness, accepting it, and just feeling in your bones that there's nothing wrong with that. That even though you may spend so many years thinking that there's something wrong with that, there, dispelling that, and being able to just surrender to the beauty that queerness is, and the beauty that is being jotolicious. Like he has really shown his work, and I just love about him, and I identify with him so much. So thank you, Joseph, again, and thank you for listening. And until next time.